So now we'll turn to Javier Guzman to talk a little bit more about what's happening in terms of Colombia. I just have a question to you. In terms of the recent National Academy's report made from some points about the responsibility of national governments to ensure financial and legal protections for the regulatory agencies, basically based on your experience, what are the factors that nudge politicians to take action on this topic?
Thank you very much for the invitation. I just want to share some thoughts on how you get politicians and policymakers to support regulation. I have, I think, 4 different arguments that one could make. And of course, the arguments depend on the country and depend on the interest of the country and depend on the level of the manufacturing base in each country. And of course, no argument is a silver bullet. So it's a combination of arguments what we might end up with. The arguments are to some extent covered within the recommendations of the report, but I will try to, summarize them. So the first argument one could make is, this is important because it will help you achieve universal health coverage and the Sustainable Development Goals. So these are the overarching big goals that the country might have in this regard. And it's good because, you have a lot of relationship between the goals and regulation, both for food and medicines. The report talks about 7 direct relationships and 5 indirect relationships. So that's good. The problem with that is it's a weak relationship and causality is not there. So it will be a contribution to, achieving the goals. So you could actually say, by improving regulation, you will reduce inefficiency and you will have more money to actually cover more people. So you will get more into the universal health coverage. And you will do so by, what Mikkel was talking about and what he's done, which is increasing access by reducing prices, by increasing competition. And the point there is regulators do have the key to shape the market. So they have the gatekeeping role and they could actually prioritize the products with public health benefit or the products that are gonna basically break monopolies. But regulators do not want to talk about that and do not want to take that lead. And they feel, that's kind of like not within our, work stream. We focus on safety, efficacy, and quality. We don't talk about money. And I think that's a mistake. So I think that's one of the, the entry points that one could have in terms of policymakers interested in universal health coverage and sustainable development goals. The second argument one could make is a health argument. The health argument is not a very strong argument, even though we're all healthcare professionals to some extent here, or people interested in health. And we could say, the report does bring all the sources in terms of the 400,000 people dying every year because of food that is not safe, or the 7,000 people in Africa dying because of pneumonia. And the problem with that is it's compelling. The data is compelling, but it's not country-specific. So the policymaker will not see any reflection of the country, his or her country, in that big number. So one could say, oh yeah, that's my neighboring country, or that's actually Africa, or that's actually somewhere else, but it's not here. And the problem with that is also there's no way to measure progress. So there's no way to say to the policymaker, you do an intervention and I will be able to reduce that number for you. So that's a difficult argument because of that. But I see how data is helping us, make the argument of, how important is regulation in terms of life saved. The third argument is the economic argument. And we heard Mary Lou talking this morning about making the case, and she mentioned the economic argument as the first argument that one would have to make to the finance ministry or the president of a country. And I think that argument is a winning argument, but it's not very, well, to some extent, I think it's not a straightforward argument, because one could say, by improving regulation, you will improve your local manufacturing capacity. And that is true to a certain extent if the private sector is involved and is actually buying into the idea. And as I said this morning, if there is a manufacturing base already there, you can, with the help of the regulator, increase the level of that manufacturing base to make it more of an industry with the ability to export, with the ability to use free trade agreements, with the ability to even, reach other regions. And that's compelling. The problem with that one is, well, again, regulators are not really keen on that one because of the conflict of interest. So they want to work at an arm's length from industry in a lot of cases. And you see how that's not always the case. It depends on the context, but it's something to keep in mind. The other issue is, and I think it's an issue that we haven't talked about, is how we can support the industry to fight against unfair competition and illegal products. I think we haven't made a good case in terms of the role of the regulators fighting illegality. And by illegality, I don't mean informal markets. I mean, we heard about the 80% in terms of food. I'm talking about crime. I'm talking about organized crime. And there's a nice report from UNODC talking about crime in regards to substandard and falsified medicines. And that is basically what I think the regulator could focus on and could actually partner with the right authorities. And that will help us with the fourth argument. The fourth argument is you will need to do it, or you should do it, because it's important for your public, it's important for the consumers, and the consumers will basically punish you if you don't do it. And that argument, I think, is an interesting argument, because we heard, and from the report we saw, how by 2020, half of the world will live in a middle-class household. And the richer the people, the more demands there will be and the less tolerance for mistakes. That will be basically demanding bigger actions against crime, demanding bigger actions against, illegality. And I think there is one downside that could actually be an opportunity with that argument. The report talks about when regulation is done properly, it's invisible. So we should move away from that, because if we talk to the people, to the constituencies, in terms of crisis means failure. Whenever the regulator is in the news because of crisis, it's because it's assumed that the regulator has failed. The question is, how do we sell what the regulator does when there's no crisis? And I think a nice entry point is illegal products, illegality, something that the regulator is actively pursuing on the benefit of public health. Or what Mexico did and other countries did in terms of being able to show how competition has increased because of the efficiency within the regulatory authority, and how that has an impact on prices as well. Again, we have a problem with the food angle, because, and to some extent with the medicines, because the linkage between disease and products is not there. So people might one out of 10, we heard, fall sick because of food that is not safe, but people do not link it to food and do not link it to specific products, and surveillance is not there. So that's something that will make the argument more difficult. I guess my point is there's not a single bullet. You could have 4 different entry points as I can see it. The 4 entries have benefits but also have some difficulties. But I guess the success is to bring the right mix of messages from the 4 angles to the policymaker, thinking with the context in mind. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Javier.